Good morning. Good morning. Britain's Newsroom is coming up for you very shortly with myself and Ben Leo. It is great to have your company this morning. Plenty to talk about, including in the next half hour or so, we will find out whether Shamima Begum, after many appeals, is going to be allowed to return to the UK. What are your thoughts on that? If she isn't, then what happens to her? Whose responsibility is she?
Yeah, I guess she just stays in that refugee camp, doesn't she? Also, that bombshell column piece from Suella Braverman in The Telegraph today, she says Britain is being bullied by Islamists who now run the country. Do you agree, or is she just over-egging the concern for what we've seen over Palestine? Join us in a few minutes, Britain's Newsroom.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Chris, what is the preferred way in which the police go about their business at the moment? There's these two strands of thinking: evidence-based policing versus bobbies on the beat.
It's very, very difficult. The problem that police have got, basically, is that they're too thinly spread, and it's too much is expected of them. There's a long list, isn't it? Every month we hear police need to do more about this, police need to do more about that, and police do their best. They're overwhelmed with bureaucracy. I mean, when I was a young PC, if I took a shoplifter in, then I'd be in and out within an hour. You take a shoplifter in now, and you're doomed for the rest of your shift for 6 or 7 hours dealing with the bureaucracy. Police want to get back in those communities because community policing is really the core of policing. But such are the demands on their time at the moment, and the bureaucracy, and the fact that they are struggling now to retain experienced officers. People are hemorrhaging out of the police, and new recruits coming in haven't got that experience, and there's a good chance they may not stay anyway. So there's all sorts of problems. And for the Home Secretary to glibly say he wants more done, frankly, clearly shows that he's got no understanding of the pressure police are under, and of course the constant criticism that they face across the board. Very rarely do you actually hear of police officers getting praised for acts of bravery or acts of compassion. So there's a problem with morale in the police force, and it's clearly a problem with the Home Secretary, who needs to get out there and talk to officers on the front line who frankly are struggling. And last night, of course, was a graphic example.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It is 9:30 on Friday, the 23rd of February. You are with Britain's Newsroom with Ben Leo and Pip Thompson.
Coming up, ISIS bride to return to Britain. Any moment now, we'll hear the judgment from the Court of Appeal as Shamima Begum tries to overturn losing her British citizenship.
Islamists in charge of Britain. That is the claim this morning from former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who claims Islamic extremists are now in charge of the country.
And Speaker on the ropes, 70 MPs have signed a letter of no confidence in Sir Lindsay Hoyle after the Gaza ceasefire debate. Political editor Chris Hope has the latest.
More than 1 in 10 MPs want the Speaker to quit. I've been on talk to the rebels who want that to happen.
Stopping the boats. The UK is set to sign a new deal with the EU's border agency to tackle migrant dinghies crossing the Channel.
and energy bills to fall. Ofgem has announced that the energy price cap for a typical household will fall by 12.3% to just under £1,700 from April the 1st.
Yes, a welcome announcement from Ofgem this morning, isn't it? The lowest fall, I think, in some 2 years. Will it make a difference to you? Also,
Shamima Begum, big decision. We're going to be live in the courtroom in just a few minutes for that decision on whether Shamima can return to the UK or not. Of course, the runaway ISIS bride, she went to join Islamic State, regardless of what they got up to, the atrocities they committed. Her lawyers claim she was groomed and trafficked. Do you agree? Let us know. GBViews at gbnews.com. But first, here's your news headlines with Tatiana.
Ben, thank you very much and good morning. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Britain is set to sign a new deal with the EU's border agency in a further bid to stop small boats crossing the English Channel. The deal, agreed with Frontex, will see the UK border force cooperate more closely with its European counterparts on intelligence and training. The Home Secretary is welcoming the European Home Affairs Commissioner to oversee the signing of the landmark agreement. So far this year, 1,716 people have made the crossing. James Cleverly says the deal will help tackle the issue.
It means we can share information quicker, share intelligence quicker, we can operate more effectively. And the reason that's important is because the EU wants to secure its external borders just as we do. So people who are coming into Europe from Eastern Europe, across the Mediterranean, the European Union wants to stop them. We want to help them stop them because those people filter through Europe and ultimately find themselves on small boats coming across to the UK.
Households will see their energy bills drop to the lowest level in 2 years from April. Ofgem has announced its latest price cap drop of 12.3%, meaning the typical energy bill will now cost £1,690 a year. That's down from close to £2,000. It means a fall of £238. Child serial killer Lucy Letby's bid to appeal her convictions will be heard in court in April. She was sentenced to 14 whole life orders after she killed 7 babies and attempted to murder 6 others at a hospital where she worked as a nurse between June 2015 and 2016. If judges decline to give permission, it'll be the end of the appeal process for Letby. That hearing will provisionally be held on the 25th of April. And the Commons Speaker is facing continued pressure to step down after almost 70 MPs have called for him to resign. More than a tenth of the Commons have signed a motion expressing no confidence over the Speaker's handling of the Gaza ceasefire debate. Sir Lindsay Hoyle has apologised, but Rishi Sunak has described him and his decisions as very concerning. Sir Lindsay says he was motivated by concern about MP security, which has sparked further debate about the impact of threats and intimidation in Parliament. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
good morning and welcome to Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Ben Leo and Pip Thompson.
Now, the UK and the EU are set to sign a deal in a bid to tackle illegal migration and criminal gangs. Under the deal, the government and the bloc's border agency, Frontex, will share intelligence and training programmes, as well as post liaison staff to coordinate with each other across the borders.
Also, the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is claiming that Islamists are now in charge of Britain after the Commons Speaker admitted he'd been wrong to ignore protocol over security threats to MPs.
And her comments, of course, come a day after Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, sparked a furious backlash over a Gaza ceasefire vote by allowing a vote on a Labour amendment. The Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay, is now under pressure to quit, with almost 70 MPs calling for him to go.
Let's get the very latest on the future of Lindsay Hoyle from our political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, I note that the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, he has been speaking about, I call it the plight of Lindsay Hoyle. Maybe that's a slight exaggeration. You can clarify that. But he is saying that the Speaker, he's warning him against charging Commons conventions and saying that the only thing MPs should fear is the ballot box.
Well, that's right. And morning, Ben, and morning, Pip. That's correct. I mean, as things stand, more than 1 in 10 MPs have signed a motion, almost a petition, saying they've got no confidence in the Speaker. That's a lot of MPs. That's 3 times the number which signed a motion back in 2009, which led to Michael Martin resigning at the beginning of the MP expenses scandal. That does include, or will include, all of the SNP MPs. That's the 3rd biggest party in the Commons. That's his biggest problem he's got, the Speaker. He's got to win round those people. Now, his allies say, well, it's all gone away now, he'll survive the weekend. I've been talking to rebels this morning. They tell me that there's still more to sign. More MPs will be signing over on probably Monday. There's MPs who don't know how to use the EDM system to sign remotely or digitally in the House of Commons. The rebels think they're already there enforcing a vote and a debate of no confidence in the Speaker. But then the new number now is 15%. If they can get to 15% of MPs signing it, that's just short of 100 MPs. If they sign this motion, the view is from the rebels that should be enough for the government, that's Penny Mordaunt, to grant time in House of Commons to debate the future of the Speaker of the House of Commons. An almost unprecedented moment, a historic moment in the House of Commons. We did hear yesterday, didn't we, from Penny Mordaunt. She almost didn't quite defend the Speaker, but certainly attacked Labour for putting the Speaker in a position where he felt he had to select that Second Amendment to an SNP motion, giving MPs, Labour MPs, a get out of jail free card and are able to vote for a policy they agreed on Gaza. So there's lots of bad blood in Parliament. Lindsay Hoyle will survive the weekend. I think Monday is a crucial day. If many more sign it, it will be very hard to resist having this historic debate of no confidence in the Speaker of the House of Commons.
Yeah, he's clinging on, isn't he? No doubt. Chopper, can I get your thoughts on Suella Braverman's opinion piece in the Telegraph this morning? She said that Britain was now being run by Islamists and we'd been bullied into submission. Is it causing shockwaves across Westminster?
Yeah, I've got the article here that the former Home Secretary wrote. It is. I mean, she writes. She just doesn't hold back, does she, Pip or Ben? She says here how Islamist cranks and left-wing extremists are hijacking our institutions and bullying our country into submission. This is a crisis, she says. Fight back. The fight back must start now with urgency. She said that Keir Starmer bowed to the mob on one of the most shameful days of our democracy. I mean, in her language, she's pushing it very hard, but she makes the point, which I think lots of MPs share, people like Sir Geoffrey Cox, the former Attorney General, that by allowing that second motion, allowing Labour MPs to vote for their policy on Gaza, not having to vote for the SNP or government, and saying he's doing that because he was concerned for MPs' safety, that is bowing to the mob. He is literally saying pressure on MPs outside of the Parliament results in the business changing on the floor of the House of Commons. That is a problem, and I think what Sir Lindsay Hoyle has said so far is not enough. Now, the government is taking action today, or we hear reports of Lord Walney, who's the government's official advisor on political violence. He is proposing safe spaces around MP offices and Parliament. Whether that's enough, because, of course, physically not being there won't protect MPs from abuse online, and that's far worse often. So it's the beginning of a pushback against this pressure on MPs.
OK. Political editor Christopher Hope, thank you for now. Joining us in the studio is Conservative MP for Shipley, Philip Davis. Now, Philip, good morning to you. You've been very fulsome, haven't you, in your praise and support for Lindsay Hoyle. You don't want him to go anywhere. Why is that?
Well, look, Lindsay made a bad decision on Wednesday. No, his decision was indefensible. I certainly wouldn't try and defend his decision. He made completely the wrong decision. But look, he made a mistake. Unlike most politicians, he's come to the House of Commons at least twice now to say, I made a mistake. If only other MPs would be quite so willing to come forward and say, I made a mistake. He admits he made a mistake. And he apologised for making that mistake. And look, if the point I made is that if everyone lost their job every time they made a mistake, I would have lost my job within about a week of being elected to Parliament 19 years ago, and I probably would have lost it every week since.
But if he does hang on here, is his position though forever tainted?
No, I don't see why it should be. Look, he made a bad decision, and I think, look, there should be much more focus, if you don't mind me saying so, on Keir Starmer and the role he played in putting intolerable pressure on the Speaker. I mean, I've spoken to Labour MPs about what happened, and basically
he denies it, doesn't he?
No, he says he urged the Speaker to agree to the motion. He said that's what he said. I mean,
quite careful wording.
He's never actually said what I'd like to know is what did he actually say to the Speaker? That's not for the Speaker to disclose. That's for Keir Starmer to disclose. But what I've heard from Labour MPs is that basically he's told the Speaker that Labour MPs would be at risk if he didn't agree to this amendment. And I've even heard the phrase, he would have blood on his hands. Now, that is putting the Speaker in an intolerable position. And I think that's the biggest scandal of all in this.
Philip, do you believe Sir Lindsay when he says he'd made that decision because of fears for MPs' safety?
Yeah, I think, and of course that's completely indefensible too, because we can't have a situation where, in effect, we're making decisions in Parliament because of that's mob rule.
OK, well, this brings us on to Suella Braverman's article today in The Telegraph, and it is very, very strongly worded. I mean, she talks about the Islamists, the extremists, the anti-Semites are in charge now. We're sleepwalking into a ghettoised society where free expression and British values are diluted. Some people would say that she's doing this to get votes, and it's a leadership pitch. Why would people be wrong to think that? And is this sort of language actually helpful?
Well, look, Suella should, as we've just been talking about, Suella should say what she thinks, and she shouldn't be cowed into not saying what she thinks. Otherwise, we're back in the situation where people aren't saying what they think because of mob rule. Presumably, she's saying this because that's what she thinks. I don't think there's any suggestion that she doesn't actually believe this. Whether she has an ulterior motive for a leadership.
Did you read it and think, oh, this is a leadership pitch from her?
I don't think Suella's hidden the fact that she probably would like to run for the leadership. She has done in the past, so the chances are she will do again. But look, I think with all of these things, we should take people what they say at face value, that's what they believe, and let's, rather than try to undermine the reasons for doing it, let's look at what she said. I think there's a lot of truth in what she says.
Has she been vindicated? Because she was sacked for basically saying that the police were going soft on the pro-Palestine marches.
No, she wasn't sacked for. I mean, let's be. She basically sacked herself, basically, and whether that was deliberate.
For going ahead with that column in the Telegraph.
Look, I've never been a minister because I want to speak freely, right? It's a choice I've made. What you can't do is you can't become a minister and still think you can speak freely. She basically was publishing articles without getting clearance from Number 10, which is a breach of the ministerial code.
Right, but she was right, wasn't she, in the content of what she was saying?
Look, when I got elected in 2005, I was the parliamentary spokesman for the campaign against political correctness, which I did for many years. And I was warning about this for years, that basically we've got ourselves into a situation in this country, and I was a lone voice saying this for years and years and years, that we're in a situation in this country where people are afraid to say what they think. I'm not talking about extremists, I'm talking about perfectly ordinary, decent people in this country are petrified of what words they use, what they say, in case some zealot takes exception to it and tries to force them out of their job, etc., etc. This has been happening for years and years and years. And the culmination, I guess, of this was the House of Commons changing its rules in order to appease a mob, and we mustn't allow that ever to happen again. That must never, ever happen again. But what we've got to get back to this belief in free speech, and I've got to say, other politicians don't help. The media don't often help. They clamp down on people who say something.
Well, not GBNews, I can tell you that.
No, I'm not, absolutely. But what we've got to do is we've got to allow people to have their say, because otherwise, we don't live in a free society, and we should all be afraid of that.
OK, Phil, do stay with us. Any moment now, though, we are going to be hearing the judgment on ISIS bride Shamima Begum. Will she be allowed to return to the UK? We're going to be bringing you that announcement, that judgment, live here on Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Stay with us.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Lots of people very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. Iran obviously denying it, but the next move from the United States, our key allies, will be absolutely key.
Absolutely right. And I think there's a lot of talk about where this could go, whether the situation could be escalated. But I think the chatter is heading in the right direction, which is about de-escalation. So if there are going to be targeted sanctions against Iran, that's already happened through expelling certain diplomats and other measures there. But you can do that without arm-to-arm combat at this stage. But I think the US will be weighing up all of its options. Anthony Blinken obviously gave a press conference in the United States yesterday to say that, there will be a response from the US, but it'll be at their time and it'll be in the way in which they think is the most appropriate. So all eyes are now on the United States as to when it makes that move.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, how domestic politics plays so much into international politics. The States, they've got a presidential election this year. We've got a budget coming up. So all the noise, both sides. You've got Donald Trump saying, go a bit more hawkish, I suppose you could say, than President Biden. And here we've got all the generals. We've got the Secretary of State for Defence coming out saying we need conscription, we need more cash. But a lot of that is part of the sort of national narratives rather than actually looking at what's happening in Iran, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it plays into, the very uncertain times that we're living. And you're absolutely right. There'll be supporters of Donald Trump who are clearly adversaries of Joe Biden to say we must act now. It's a demonstration of showing your strength. Opponents of Biden will say that the US looks weak if it doesn't take action now against Iran, who are clearly, as we know, funding these at arm's length organisations like Hezbollah in Tehran, like the Houthis who are carrying out the attacks in the Red Sea. So Iran is responsible.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Shamima Begum, she is set to find out in the next few minutes if she has won an appeal against the removal of her British citizenship.
She was just 15 when she left London to go to Syria. Her British citizenship was revoked, but her lawyers argue she was a victim of trafficking. Here in the studio is the Conservative MP for Shipley, Philip Davies. He's still with us, and GB News reporter Charlie Peters. Charlie, let's start with you. Can you just lay out what's going on today? How pivotal will the decision be? Actually, in the context of what we're seeing in Parliament and also with Suella Braverman's column this morning, it all fits in quite nicely, doesn't it?
Well, this is the Court of Appeal, and it comes a year and a day after the Special Immigration Appeals Commission last February said that upheld the government's decision to render Shamima Begum stateless. But her lawyers are attacking that decision through two main avenues. Firstly, they contend that she was a trafficking victim. The state has failed to consider how she actually made it to Syria through Turkey when she was 15 in February 2015. And actually, when that commission was actioned in February of last year, the judge did say that the strongest part of their argument, the most compelling argument they had, was the trafficking angle. But they're also going to be talking about how the state, they said, failed to consider that they were making her de facto stateless. As she has Bangladeshi descent, up until you're 19 years old, according to the law in Bangladesh, you can automatically claim citizenship through bloodline. But she's now 24, and she didn't make that decision by the time she turned 21. So they're blaming the state for making her stateless. Of course, that is, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is a breach of that line. And they're saying that the Special Immigration Appeals Commission also breached the public sector equality duty in doing so. The lawyers are also adding to that argument by saying that several other organs of the state failed her in 2015 when she fled to Syria to join the Islamic State. In particular, the Met, the council and her schools, they should have known that she was being radicalised.
Interesting when we see those pictures of her, for viewers watching, how she's changed her appearance. She's become and wanted to become very westernised, which I'm sure, you know, to help her bid to return here. There is still the claim that, or the thinking that she was 15 when she left. She was a child. She was groomed by extremists. Can she change? Has she changed? Does she need rehabilitating? And who is paying for all this?
Well, she's received hundreds of thousands of pounds of legal aid, we know that for sure. But there's clearly also been sort of a backroom PR campaign around Shamima. When she was first discovered in 2019 by the Times newspaper, some of her remarks at the time were particularly shocking. They made her famous the world over, saying that people who had been killed by the Islamic State were enemies of Islam, describing some of the events that she took part in and observed, and again repeated those comments later to the BBC.
And also about the Manchester Arena bombing as well.
Precisely.
She said it was justified because of Western activities in the Middle East.
And the same thing for the Yazidi women who had been slaughtered and enslaved. She said, well, the same thing happens in Iraq to those of my Islamic persuasion. So that was very much central to her being cast in a new image by her team in 2021. We saw that her undergo that sort of PR campaign. The state is arguing, well, if she held those views then, does she still hold them now?
So is there a good chance she wins this case today?
Well, she's failed so many appeals, but that last judge in February of 2023 saying that the trafficking argument was the most compelling, that she was a child, under 16 in particular, fleeing with her school friends, that is the line that could lead to a realistic possibility of her being granted the chance to come to Britain and fight this case.
Philip, do we have a responsibility towards her?
The responsibility we've got is to the security of the country. Ultimately, that's the first and main priority of any government is defence of the realm, protecting the public, and that should trump all other considerations, to be perfectly honest. And she, in my opinion, is and remains a threat to the security of the country, and I very much hope the court upholds the government's decision.
Well, should we just remind people what ISIS, the group she left to join, did? They burned people alive in cages, they beheaded people, they stoned kids and women, they raped their way through Syria and Iraq, and they committed a genocide, according to the UN, against the Yazidis. So what's her return, if it's granted, going to do for the atmosphere of this country? Bearing in mind what's going on in Parliament, bearing in mind the tensions that are rising, it's going to tip us into boiling point, isn't it?
No, it is. It will be a terrible decision, and people would feel that the rights of individuals, and some deeply unpleasant individuals, is put ahead of the rights of law-abiding citizens, and we cannot allow that to happen. The security of the country has got to be the top priority, the security of people.
It could also potentially open the door to other ISIS brides to want to return to the UK.
Absolutely. But look, I mean, court decisions are, I would never like to predict. I've seen some bizarre court decisions in my time, so I wouldn't want to wager.
Okay. Well, we're going to find out. We will find out at just after 10 o'clock. We will be getting that Court of Appeal judgment live here on GB News.
Yep, still more to come, including the 2-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Stay with us after news.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, Alex Burkill here again with your latest GB News weather forecast. Today is going to be a blustery and showery day for many of us, some of the showers turning pretty heavy. There is some frost around first thing, across northern parts in particular, but otherwise, like I said, plenty of showers, and some of these showers will turn heavy, possibly even thundery, with some hail and even some sleet or snow over the higher ground of Scotland. Sunny spells in between the showers, the best of these towards eastern parts where you have the greatest chance of staying dry, and temperatures around average for the time of year. Highs close to 10 or 11 Celsius in the south, but worth noting that's lower than it was earlier on in the week. As we go through this evening and overnight, still some showers, particularly towards western and southern parts. Inland areas likely to be mostly dry, and here we will see some clear skies developing, under which temperatures will take a bit of a dip. So we could see some patchy frost, particularly in rural spots first thing tomorrow morning, and also some icy stretches and some mist and fog patches too. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, yes, still some showers, particularly for western and southern coastal areas, but for many it is looking largely dry. There'll be some decent sunny spells for a time, but perhaps some fair weather cloud bubbling up as we go through the afternoon. Temperatures will be similar to today, so just about getting into high single figures or perhaps scraping into double digits. Potentially some very wet and windy weather affecting southern parts as we go through Sunday, a drier story further north, and temperatures still about average.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Yeah, so any moment now we're going to hear the judgment on the ISIS bride Shamima Begum. She's trying to overturn the fact she lost her British citizenship for running off with terror group ISIS to Syria. Don't go anywhere. We have that live stream very shortly. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel, with Ben and Pip.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Mike Freer joins me now. Mike, thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Firstly, how are you?
It's been a busy day, and it's been quite a traumatic experience. It's a real wrench to walk away from a job that you love, but also a constituency that you've become. You know, I live there; it's my home, and I regard many of my constituents as friends, and it is an amazing place. And to walk away from that is really quite. It's quite an emotional wrench to think this was a job I loved, but unfortunately I can't do it anymore.
Can you talk me through the process? Because you mentioned about the alleged arson attack, etc., being the final straw, but this has been a really quite vile journey to get to this point. So what kind of threats have you had? What's that look like?
Well, like every MP, I mean, you day in, day out, you get abusive emails, you get low-level stuff that, whether we should accept it, but we do, it's graffiti, it's things like, in the past I've had a mock Molotov cocktail left on the office door, meaning we had to evacuate the whole building. I've come out of my house and found a note on my car. Where I live is common knowledge, but what I drive is less so. And it's a few weeks after John Mann had the wheel nuts on his car tampered with. So that all kind of makes you get a bit, what on earth's going on. But I've had two run-ins with the organisation that was Muslims Against Crusades, and people like Anjum Chowdhury, who was behind that organisation, been to prison. But online it said, I used to do surgery in mosques, so I wanted to go out and see people. And online, it's a picture of me saying, you're not welcome in our mosque, let Stephen Timms be a pointed reminder. So it's not very subtle.
Well, just for our viewers and listeners who might not remember that.
Stephen Timms, of course, was stabbed by a woman who'd been radicalised. Thank heavens he survived. So it was a very unsubtle.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good morning to you. It's 10 a.m. on Friday, February the 23rd. This is Britain's Newsroom with me, Ben Leo, and Pip Thompson.
Will this ISIS bride return to the UK? Any minute now, we'll hear the judgment from the appeal court as Shamima Begum tries to overturn losing her British citizenship.
Speaker on the ropes. Almost 70 MPs have signed a letter of no confidence in Sir Lindsay Hoyle after the Gaza ceasefire debate. Is his authority hanging by a thread?
Islamists in charge of Britain. That is the claim this morning from former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who claims they are bullying Britain into submission.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, in that spirit, today I can announce a new package of 200 Brimstone anti-tank missiles in a further boost to defend Ukraine.
And as we approach the 2-year anniversary of Russia invading Ukraine, Defence Secretary Grant Shapps pledges more military support. This is on top of the £12 billion we've already given them since February 2022. And we've got a Ukrainian MP on the show a bit later on who's going to discuss the need for much more support from not just us, but the US and our NATO allies as well.
We're going to be going to the appeal court for that ruling on Shamima Begum very, very shortly. We're bringing it you here live. First, let's get your headlines from Tatiana.
Pip, thank you very much and good morning. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Britain is set to sign a new deal with the EU's border agency in a further bid to stop small boats crossing the Channel. The deal, agreed with Frontex, will see the UK border force cooperate more closely with its European counterparts on intelligence and training. The Home Secretary is welcoming the European Home Affairs Commissioner to oversee the signing of the landmark agreement. So far this year, 1,716 people have made the crossing. James Cleverly says the deal will help tackle the issue.
It means we can share information quicker, share intelligence quicker, we can operate more effectively. And the reason that's important is because the EU wants to secure its external borders just as we do. So people who are coming into Europe from Eastern Europe, across the Mediterranean, the European Union wants to stop them. We want to help them stop them because those people filter through Europe and ultimately find themselves on small boats coming across to the UK.
Households will see their energy bills drop to the lowest level in 2 years from April. Ofgem has announced its latest price cap drop by 12.3% in response to wholesale prices. A typical energy bill will fall to £1,690. It means a fall of £238 for a household using a typical amount of energy. Energy Minister Claire Coutinho says the announcement is a positive start.
£250 almost coming off people's energy bills is going to be really welcome news for families up and down the country. We still have things like the cost of living payments in place, £900 for people who are really struggling, because we know there are some people who are still having a difficult time. But overall, this is good news for people in the country today.
Shamima Begum, who travelled to Syria as a teenager and became an ISIS bride, is about to find out if she's won an appeal against the removal of her British citizenship. Well, we can take you live to the Court of Appeal for that ruling.
2024. Our summary is not in substitution for, nor does it form any part of our open judgment, which we are handing down separately in writing at the end of this hearing. Copies of that written judgment are available together with a written citation for our open judgment is 2024 EWCA Civ 152 and will appear on the National Archives in the normal way. Shamima Begum was born in the United Kingdom in August 1999. She lived and attended school in Tower Hamlets. Her parents are of Bangladeshi origin, and through them, Miss Begum had Bangladeshi citizenship, at least until her 21st birthday. In February 2015, Miss Begum, then aged 15, travelled via Turkey to Syria, and aligned with the organisation ISIL, Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. also known as ISIS or Daesh, which controlled territory described as the Caliphate. She married an ISIL fighter soon after arriving. She went on to have 3 children, sadly none of whom survived. She was still in the Caliphate when it collapsed in January 2019 and was taken to a camp in northeast Syria. Section 40, subsection 2 of the British Nationality Act 1981 gives the Secretary of State, in practice the Home Secretary, power to deprive a person of British citizenship if satisfied that deprivation is conducive to the public good. On the 19th of February 2019, without prior notice to Miss Begum, the then Secretary of State made an order depriving her of British citizenship on the ground that it would be conducive to the public good to do so, because her return to the United Kingdom would present a risk to national security. There is a right of appeal to the Special Immigration Appeals Commission, SIAC, against orders for deprivation of citizenship made on national security grounds. On the 3rd of May 2019, Miss Begum applied for leave to enter the UK so that she could take part in her appeal to SIAC. Her application was refused. On the 26th of February 2021, the United Kingdom Supreme Court held that the Secretary of State had acted lawfully in refusing Miss Begum leave to enter the United Kingdom for the purposes of her appeal to SIAC. Miss Begum elected to proceed with that appeal, notwithstanding that she could not give evidence or be physically present. On the 22nd of February 2023, SIAC dismissed Miss Begum's appeal against the deprivation decision. The issue in this appeal, and for us, is whether SIAC was right to conclude that the deprivation decision was lawful. Miss Begum put forward 5 grounds of appeal. Ground 1, ECHR Article 4. The first ground was that the Secretary of State had failed to consider whether Miss Begum had been a potential victim of trafficking for the purposes of sexual exploitation, and that this failure breached the obligations owed to her under Article 4 of the European Convention on Human Rights. SIAC had found that there was, at the very least, a, quote, credible suspicion, unquote, that she had been trafficked for such purposes in 2015. It was not argued before us that this created an absolute bar to any deprivation order. We conclude that Article 4 of the ECHR gave rise to no obviously material consideration in the context of the deprivation decision. The Article 4 duties relied on were the operational duties, comprising the protective and the recovery duties, the non-punishment principle, the investigative duty, and the restitutionary duty. In our judgment, there were 2 obstacles in the way of Miss Begum's arguments based on breach of the protective duty. The first was that SIAC had found only an arguable breach of the protective duty by organs of the state, not actual breach. The second was the passage of time between the arguable breach in 2015 and the deprivation decision in 2019, and the lack of any causal link between the 2 incidents. The recovery duty did not extend to repatriating a former victim of trafficking if they had been trafficked abroad. Article 16 of the European Convention Against Trafficking did not assist the appellant in establishing such a duty. The non-punishment principle also did not assist Miss Begum. There is no authority to suggest that the principle of non-punishment extends beyond criminal prosecutions. To extend the principle to a deprivation decision would go beyond incremental development of the relevant jurisprudence. The investigative duty and the argument that any investigation into the suspected trafficking in 2015 could only be effective if Miss Begum were present in the United Kingdom was not, in our judgment, an obviously material consideration for the Secretary of State when making the deprivation decisions. 3 reasons for this. 1, it would be tantamount to an obligation to repatriate. 2, it would be inconsistent with the Supreme Court's decision that the Secretary of State was not required to give Miss Begum leave to enter to present her appeal. Thirdly, any investigative duty is only to take reasonable steps, and SIAC were right to find that reasonable steps do not extend to repatriating a person assessed to pose a threat to national security. No restitutionary duty was owed in the instant case, as there was no established breach of Article 4. A possible or arguable breach is insufficient to trigger the restitutionary duty. Further, the asserted breach occurred 4 years before the deprivation decision. Further, the focus of a deprivation decision on the grounds of national security must, in our judgment, be the assessment of risk. We did not accept that an individual assessed as presenting a risk to national security must be repatriated, or even that the Secretary of State is required to consider repatriation in order to meet obligations which might be owed under Article 4. Ground 2. Trafficking issues at common law. The second ground was that the Secretary of State failed to take into account the possibility that Miss Begum had been a victim of trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. It was submitted that this was a breach of his duties at common law. Although the information before him did not discuss the case in terms of Article 4 or of the European Convention Against Trafficking, the Secretary of State was aware of the circumstances of Miss Begum's departure to Syria, and the materials before him powerfully expressed the view that people who were children when they went to align with ISIL should be considered first and foremost as victims. The Secretary of State took into account the possibility that Miss Begum had been a victim of trafficking. That assessment was kept under review after February 2019. SIAC was entitled to find that the issue of whether Miss Begum had travelled voluntarily was within the expertise of the intelligence agencies. Voluntariness of travel was not a binary question, and Miss Begum may well have been influenced and manipulated by others, but still have made a calculated decision to travel to Syria and align with ISIL. The assessment of the national security risk was, in our judgment, a question of evaluation and judgment entrusted by Parliament to the Secretary of State. Ground 3, de facto statelessness. The third ground was that the Secretary of State failed to consider that Section 40 of the British Nationality Act 1981 prohibits the making of a deprivation order if the consequence would be to make the person concerned stateless. It is accepted that this means de jure stateless, that is to say, stateless as a matter of international law, and that the deprivation order did not make Miss Begum so stateless because she still retained her Bangladeshi citizenship as at February 2019. What was argued under Ground 3 was that the Secretary of State nevertheless failed to consider that the deprivation order would make Miss Begum de facto stateless, since there was no realistic possibility of the Bangladeshi authorities permitting her to enter that country. SIAC held, and we agree, that it was sufficient that the ministerial submission and accompanying documents put before the Secretary of State when he made the deprivation decision indicated that there was no realistic possibility of Ms. Begum being permitted to enter Bangladesh. It was not necessary that he should also have been asked to consider separately the concept of de facto statelessness. Ground 4, procedural fairness. SIAC had held, departing from its previous case law dating back to Al-Jeddah against the Secretary of State for the Home Department, that Ms. Begum should have been notified of the Secretary of State's intention to make a deprivation order against her and should have been given the opportunity to make representations. We hold that at least a main purpose, if not the main purpose, of Section 40, subsection 2 of the British Nationality Act 1981 is to protect the public from a threat to national security, which could be frustrated by a requirement to invite representations prior to a deprivation decision. Notifying a person abroad of an intention to remove their citizenship could enable that person to make a preemptive return to the United Kingdom and frustrate the purpose of the deprivation decision. Those deprived of their citizenship are afforded an appellate-level merits review of the deprivation decision through SIAC. This distinctive right to appeal and the risk of preemptive action are, in our judgment, compelling reasons to construe Section 40, subsection 5 of the British Nationality Act 1981 as excluding any right to prior consultation before a deprivation decision is made on national security grounds, as was held in Al-Jeddah. In our judgment, SIAC fell into error in concluding that Ms. Begum was entitled to the opportunity to make representations before the Secretary of State took the deprivation decision. In any event, however, SIAC was correct to rule that it was immaterial that Ms. Begum was not afforded the opportunity to make submissions prior to the deprivation decision. It was inevitable that the Secretary of State would have made the same decision, regardless of possible representations made by Ms. Begum. Ground 5, the public sector equality duty. The deprivation decision was exempt from considerations of the public sector equality duty under Section 149 of the Equality Act 2010, pursuant to the exemption created by Section 192 of the same Act, as it concerned the safeguarding of national security. In this case, the public sector equality duty concerns were whether the exercise of deprivation powers disproportionately applied to British Muslims and/or impacted detrimentally upon the relations between members of Muslim communities and others. In our judgment, the national security exemption applies to any exercise of function or powers. As such, the the deprivation decision was exempt from the duties that arose under Section 149. The exemption did not require the court to undertake a separate proportionality assessment. In any event, SIAC had been correct to find that the deprivation power was exercised in a proportionate manner. In conclusion, for these reasons, we unanimously dismiss the appeal. It could be argued that the decision in Ms. Begum's case was harsh. It could also be argued that Ms. Begum is the author of her own misfortune. But it is not for this court to agree or disagree with either point of view. Our only task is to assess whether the deprivation decision was unlawful. We have concluded it was not, and the appeal is dismissed. Mr. James Matthews.
So there you have it. The appeal court has dismissed the appeal of Shamima Begum. She wanted to return to the UK. She wanted to overturn the government's decision to strip her of her British citizenship. But the appeal court says, no, she has to stay exactly where she is. That appeal is dismissed.
And I tell you what, in the context of what's happening in Parliament and Suella Braverman's column this morning, I think the nation, the majority of the nation, probably is breathing a sigh of relief. Is it a victory for common sense? GBviews at gbnews.com.
Let's bring in human rights lawyer David Haigh, who I'm sure was listening to this intently. David, just go into a little bit more detail, because there was a lot of, obviously, legal language there. Just go into a little bit of detail about what that appeal court judge was saying.
Good morning to you both. I mean, effectively, it's a resounding rejection of Shamima Begum's attempt to come back to Britain and to fight her case there. And essentially what happened with the Court of Appeal, they've upheld the decisions of the Special Immigrations Appeal Court earlier. And this is, a long journey that Ms. Begum's been on. And it's certainly, though, not the end of the court battles. And it certainly was a resounding rejection. But now we look towards the Supreme Court, and I'm sure her legal teams will be doing that. So it's not the end.
Right, so what exactly are her options? The Supreme Court, European Court of Human Rights?
Yeah, so the first thing that she would need to do is go to the Supreme Court. Now, you can make an appeal to the Supreme Court if it's a matter of public interest. And it could be easily, well, not easily, I think it would be able for her legal team to argue that it is. She's already been to the Supreme Court before. This is a long-running legal battle that's bouncing between courts. That would be the first step, to go to the Supreme Court to show that the appeal decision that we've just heard is wrong, and that the Supreme Court needs to hear it because it's a matter of public interest and on a point of law. If she fails, then she could then go to the European Court of Human Rights. So you can imagine, I mean, we've seen with various cases like Rwanda, etc., how long these legal processes take. So this is just going to continue going on and on. I would imagine they will do both, and I would imagine, this is going to go on for several years more.
David, who's paying for all this?
Effectively, we are, the British taxpayer. She has legal aid. I think it was 9 years ago that she went to Syria, and I think the legal battle's been 5 years. I think it's been going on for. So legal aid. So you can imagine the number of lawyers that have been involved, the level of the lawyers that have been involved, and the expense that we, the British taxpayer, are being put to. So you've got two more steps now. After this, it will be, I'm sure they will appeal to the Supreme Court, and if that's allowed and they lose that, it will be the European Court of Human Rights.
And if it went to European judges, do you get the feeling that the outcome may be different, bearing in mind our fractious relationship with the continent, or at least the European Union?
Ben, I'm not sure that it would, actually, because if you look at the actual rights, it depends what they argue, but if you look at whether or not you can basically cancel someone's citizenship, when you look at the rights that are set down in the European Human Rights Convention as opposed to the UN, it's not really there as a right that's given. They would have to look at one of the other areas. So it's not very clear. Now, most of the judgments in the cases that have gone before the European courts have been about people that want to be a citizen of a country rather than the other way around, where it's been taken off. So it's unclear. It might actually be one occasion when you see the European Court, backing a decision of the English courts. But let's see. But it's certainly not clear that I don't think that the European Court would be in favour of the application.
In making that judgment, is the appeal court also saying that they deem her a threat to the nation, or is that not their call?
I think that's not what their decision is. Their decision is their role is to find out if the lower court made any mistakes, if they followed basically the law and the procedure, if they made any errors in law, or if they made any errors in fact. It's not about, and it's at the time of that decision. So it's not if there's new information now, if there's new evidence, it's at the time that the lower court made the decision. Were they correct in doing so? Were there any errors? Ms. Begum's lawyers set out 5 grounds, and we just heard that the appeal court universally, resoundingly rejected all of those. And a detailed judgment, just even orally, I mean, we'll get the written one later, as to why each of those was rejected. So it's a very, very clear rejection of her attempts to come back to Britain. I'm sure her lawyers will appeal to the Supreme Court, or at least try to get permission to do that, and this will go on. And I'm sure we will all be back here discussing this times again.
And David, in the meantime, where is Shamima Begum going to be? Is she just languishing in that refugee camp in Syria still?
She is, and I mean there's effectively kind of almost two stories going on here. One was the cancellation of her citizenship, and one was her attempt to come back to the UK to fight that. That was something that she wasn't allowed to do, so she was deemed obviously a security threat and wasn't allowed to come back to fight that, and had to do that from a refugee camp in Syria, where she remains and will remain until something changes.
OK. David Haigh, thank you very much for talking to us. David Haigh, human rights lawyer. Really, really useful analysis there. Also, what's going to be useful is talking to our reporter, Charlie Peters, about this ruling. It was quite detailed, wasn't it, Charlie? But they were very, very clear.
Direct national security trumps all of those concerns raised by Shamima Begum's legal team. All 5 grounds have been dismissed. So it is a unanimous decision led there by Lady Chief Justice Sue Carr. And I think, as Ben was alluding to before we came to this live shot from the Court of Appeal, this comes, of course, at a particularly fractious time in Britain. Just 2 days ago, we heard Sir William Shawcross, the independent reviewer and advisor to prevent this country's counter-extremism duty, saying that he thinks it's failing and the public is still at risk. So some 9 years after she fled from Bethnal Green over to Syria, he is still raising concerns that this country is not doing enough to focus on counter-extremism, in particular on Islamist terror. I mean, she fled with 2 schoolgirls, 2 fellow schoolgirls.
They're believed to be dead.
They almost certainly have been killed by the international coalition who led airstrikes. They're still ongoing, that operation in Syria and Iraq.
We're getting a lot of viewers saying, how come she's entitled to legal aid here? Why is the taxpayer footing the bill for all this?
Well, that was a very controversial decision when it was first made. I mean, I can't remember what ministerial position he had at the time. He's had so many, but Jeremy Hunt at the time said that he was uncomfortable with the decision. But no senior ministers actually took the time to say that shouldn't happen, because legal aid is available to those who do not have the means to independently fund their legal processes. But as we're hearing, this will go on, as we just heard from our legal commentator. So concerns will be raised now as how much more money can Shamima take from the public purse?
I think as of the start of last year, the bill to the taxpayer was already £5 million, which is extortionate. Just a quick one on the protests we've seen with Palestine. We've had, of course, people bizarrely supporting Houthi rebels and so on. Do you think we're going to get any support in public for Shamima Begum?
I think there are many people involved in the resurgence of her public image since 2021. In particular, that first ground that her legal team raised today, that she has been a victim of trafficking, trying to rebrand this issue not as a young woman who gave moral and wifely succour to one of the most evil forces in human history, but rather a child who was duped and conned by promises of a better life. I think out-and-out support for what she did and what she was involved with is unlikely, but we will almost certainly throughout the day hear people saying she was a victim and this is the wrong decision.
And do you think we will hear from her at all? We'll get any sort of comment from her? Because she has been interviewed before in this refugee camp where she is. She was 15 back then when she travelled to Syria. She's now 24 years old.
So she gave several interviews in 2019. In fact, when the Metropolitan Police were launching their investigation into developing grounds to deprive her citizenship and other potential charges, to gather that intelligence, they actually made inquiries to the various media organisations that had met her to say, any unpublished footage you have, we need it. She has spoken a lot to the media, in particular since 2021. So I think we can expect a statement from her legal team and indeed Shamima herself later today.
Charlie Peters, thank you so much. We will, of course, be bringing you more coverage on this breaking news throughout the show. But in the last few moments, Shamima Begum has lost her challenge over the removal of her British citizenship. That has come from the Court of Appeal, I should say. Much more to come after your morning news. Here's Tatiana.
Pip, thank you. We start with that breaking news. As we've been hearing, ISIS bride Shamima Begum has lost an appeal over the removal of her British citizenship. The now 24-year-old was a teenager when she left the UK to travel to Syria and joined the so-called Islamic State. Her citizenship was later revoked on national security grounds. Last year, she lost her challenge against the decision at the Special Immigration Appeals Commission. Britain is set to sign a new deal with the EU's border agency in a further bid to stop small boats crossing the Channel. The deal, agreed with Frontex, will see the UK border force cooperate more closely with its European counterparts on intelligence and training. The Home Secretary is welcoming the European Home Affairs Commissioner to oversee the signing of the landmark arrangement. So far this year, 1,716 people have made the crossing. The Commons speakers facing continued pressure to step down after almost 70 MPs have called for him to resign. More than a tenth of the Commons have signed a motion expressing no confidence over the Speaker's handling of the Gaza ceasefire debate. Sir Lindsay Hoyle has apologised, but the Prime Minister described his decisions as very concerning. Sir Lindsay says he was motivated by concern about MP security, which has sparked further debate about the impact of threats and intimidation in Parliament. And households will see their energy bills drop to the lowest level in 2 years from April. Ofgem has announced its latest price cap drop of 12.3%, meaning the typical energy bill will now cost £1,690 a year, down from almost £2,000. It means a fall of £238 a year or £20 a month. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2660 and 1.1700 euros. The price of gold is £1,594 and 57 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,689 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Stay with us here on GB News. Plenty to talk about, including that Court of Appeal ruling that says Shamima Begum, the ISIS bride, she stays exactly where she is, and that is in a refugee camp in northern Syria. She is not going to be allowed to return to the UK. She's lost her challenge over the removal of her British citizenship, that ruling coming from the Court of Appeal.
She's not run out of options, has she, legally? She can go to the Supreme Court and then to European judges if and when she loses that, all, by the way, at a cost to the taxpayer. At the start of last year, some £5 million of taxpayer money was spent on Shamima Begum's legal aid.
Yeah, we're getting plenty of reaction from you about this breaking story. gbviews@gbnews.com. Please do keep your thoughts coming in. But first...
In a new GB News series, Innovation Britain, we're looking at the success of British manufacturing around the country. Take a look at this.
We
We've come to the oldest borough in England. It's Malmesbury.
That's correct. King Athelstan's gaff. If we would have had the Thames, I think we would have been London, but unfortunately we're not.
Unfortunately, we're not in London, no. We're in Malmesbury, and it might be one of the oldest places in the UK, but we've got actually a really brand new product here, Chris.
Yeah.
What have you guys designed?
Absolutely. So Sweetenham and Bradley, so we are a subcontract sheet metal company, but we're actually looking into making our own products now. This is a manhole guardian, so it's an arrest device to fit inside the manhole cover when you're working on it. So it will literally clamp inside the chamber of the manhole, enable people to still access, but more importantly, not fall into the manhole, which does happen. We actually developed this because we work on defib cabinets, we manufacture defib cabinets, we manufacture bleed kits. So it was a natural step for us to look into the safety industry. The problem arose, we took a concept, so we took a very rudimentary concept, which was some mild steel, rusty old mild steel box section, and then we actually used RadQuote and all of our software to be able to develop. I think it's quite a sexy product, but maybe sexy to me is not sexy to others. But it's a great looking product. It's lightweight. It's safe. I mean, it will stop lots of accidents, and huge potential for the utilities industry, water boards, construction, anywhere there's a manhole. UK is, we should be making more as the UK. I'm a huge advocate for UK engineering. I think I explained to you earlier on, I've seen UK engineering go away offshore at times. I'm seeing it come back now. So it's important that companies like Sweetenham and Bradley, there's lots of them out there, can actually do their own thing as well.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yeah.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom. We're going to talk more about this breaking news that Shamima Begum, she has lost an appeal over the removal of her British citizenship. She is staying exactly where she is for now, in a refugee camp in northern Syria. Let's talk to writer and commentator Emma Webb, good morning, and broadcast journalist Judita De Silva, both in the studio. Emma, your overriding thoughts on hearing that ruling by the Court of Appeal?
I know I have a personal, professional investment in this, but I felt physically relieved watching that judgment. I feel like my faith in the British legal system has been buoyed by it. If this decision had gone the other way and she'd been granted the right to return,
could you imagine?
Now, with what's happening with Parliament, with what's happening with Gaza and Israel, she's a symbol, she's a flashpoint for Islamist sympathisers and for outright Islamists. If she were allowed to return now, that would have been absolutely disastrous. But I feel like my faith has been somewhat restored in the legal system. The fact that it was unanimous on all points, national security trumps all of these other considerations, particularly I think on the trafficking point. That's a very important one because that's something that very often comes up time and time again.
Her lawyers claimed that she was a victim of trafficking and she would have been sexually exploited.
And I think it's important that the judge has said in this case that just because there may have been some element of manipulation, there may have been some element of grooming, but she was still autonomous in making that decision. And this is, I think, a really important point, that the time at which she chose to go to join ISIS and to become part of that terrorist state-building exercise, that is guilty of genocide against Yazidis, Christians,
And she went after the fact that all those events had happened.
She went after, you'd seen journalists and aid workers being beheaded, Alan Henning, James Foley. She would have seen all of that on the news. There's no way she couldn't have done. And that she made the autonomous decision to go out there, whether she was influenced or not, and that she is a security threat.
Let's let Judita jump in. Do you concur with what the Court of Appeal has said this morning?
I do, because I always try to take an objective position that no matter how you gutturally feel about her or your sentiments towards her, the Court of Appeal is essentially not relitigating the case that's been done. They're saying that within the parameters of the law was every point addressed and addressed thoroughly, which it has been, and they've come to this unanimous decision. So it's not a personal thing against her. It's saying that you've exercised the law, you've used it to its best recourse, and this is the conclusion. Nobody deprived you of anything you had a right to, and having done that thoroughly, this is the conclusion, and I agree with that.
I think they said that it could be argued that the decision in her case was harsh. It could be argued that she's the author of her own misfortune, but it's not for the court to agree or disagree with that point of view.
Precisely. It's not their personal opinion on anything. It's basically like saying, does the machinery work and did you use it thoroughly and use it well? And they said, yes, that has been done. And this is the conclusion you came with, having done so.
Emma, you said that, and actually I agree that you breathed a sigh of relief, and I'm sure much of the nation would have as well, hearing that judgment. However, do you think we're now going to see something of a support Shamima element to these Shamima protests, as we've seen with the Houthi rebels, people saying hands off Yemen, hands off the Houthis, even supporting Hamas? Are we going to see some sort of opportunist venture here where these pro-Palestine marchers are now morphing into something very different?
I would be surprised, and she's always had her vociferous supporters. I don't know how widespread that would be amongst these protests, because that would be out-and-out support for somebody who, you know, was an ISIS bride, was a member of ISIS. But that said, we've also seen an awful lot of support for Hamas at these rallies, and and they're also a prescribed terrorist organisation. So I wouldn't be completely surprised by that. I think, like I said, that she has become a real symbol for Islamists here in Britain, around the world, and that she has, in a way, almost become a kind of Islamist celebrity.
Yeah.
So I'm very, very pleased that this judgment has gone the way that it has. I think it's right, of course, that you should be able to to follow through with the legal process of you have to be able to appeal these sorts of decisions. But as with the case of, say, someone like Jack Letts, who was a dual Canadian citizenship, when he was deprived of his citizenship, we heard nothing else about that.
Yeah.
And in this case, I think, again, it's very important that the judge ruled that they were right to consider that the Home Secretary only had to deem it to be in law that she wasn't rendered stateless, and didn't have to consider the possibility of de facto statelessness. And like I said, we didn't talk about Jack Letts after he was stripped of his citizenship. And so I think if this is going to go on for 10, 20 years, we really do, going back to your segment earlier, need to consider and have a proper conversation about the cut-off point for legal
where does it end?
We'll continue this conversation. Today, it is a massive win for the government, but there are options ahead for Shamima Begum and her legal team. We'll be looking into that next. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 10:48. You're with Ben and Pip on Britain's Newsroom, only on GB News. Emails flying in about that Shamima Begum ruling. Of course, she's lost her appeal to come back to the UK and regain her citizenship. Leslie says, good morning, Leslie. £5 million so far, this is on the taxpayer-funded legal aid, is a ridiculous amount of money. The lawyers representing her are not going to give up this golden goose, however vague the realistic chances are. And of course, it can go on and on and on. She can now go to the Supreme Court. If she fails that, she can then go to European judges. So, as David Haig said, the human rights lawyer we just spoke to, it's, not over yet.
Could take a number of years. Well, we're joined in the studio by writer and broadcaster Emma Webb and broadcast journalist Judita De Silva. Judita, this is winding a lot of people up, the fact that taxpayers' money is being spent on this and will continue to be spent on this.
And I think that also it kind of lends even more weight and credence to the judgments we had today, because it's showing that you're still exploiting the benefits of the country while having violated it fundamentally. So you can't really say that you're much of a victim when they're still affording you the benefits of being part of this country and being governed under its system. But then I come from a family of lawyers, and one thing that's always fascinated me about Shamima is when you try a case like this that is so big, they always told me that it's not just being tried on law, it's also public opinion and optics. Where you can try the toughest case with the most egregious accusations, if you have a sympathetic client, you can win because you turn public opinion, and that's effectively your jury. Shamima is she's unappealing as a victim, as someone to feel sorry for. From the minute we saw her and the first time we heard her talk, I remember one of my uncles saying that they haven't prepped her properly because she doesn't come across as someone you could like or feel sorry for, so you're going to lose.
Well, of course, as a reminder, she said that the Manchester Arena bombings were justified because of the West's behaviour in the Middle East. She also told the BBC at one time that one thing that attracted her to ISIS was beheading videos and fighting videos. So what can she do now? We've seen this transformation of her in recent years from, wearing Islamic dress to baseball caps and a more westernised approach. What do you think she'll do now, if anything, to kind of improve the optics? We
were discussing about it. I do believe she has to have the optics rebranded, because you don't come across as about somebody who's pensive or feeling, or, there's any feeling of guilt for what has happened. Because even with the baseball caps, when you see her, she seems like she's westernising, but there's a defiance to her nature. There are certain clients that you never let speak, even though you're defending them. I believe she never should have done an interview ever. And she's someone you keep away from the public, and you talk about her but don't talk to her, because she hasn't laundered herself enough to be dealing with the public.
What would you say to those people that believe that she is still our responsibility and we don't want her, but we shouldn't be palming her off onto other nations?
There are solid arguments that it's better to have keep your enemies close, because you can monitor what she's doing, but that's going to cost money, and how long will you monitor her for? But then at the same time, part of the glory of being a British citizen is those protections that they provide even when you mess up. So there's a bigger question, a bigger conversation about, is it possible that when you commit a certain crime, your country can write you off? And that shouldn't be possible. So there is validation to that argument.
Emma, I'm sorry, why should we invite her back and spend extortionate amounts of money keeping her in prison and fed and dressed when she... Let's, again, remind people what she did. She went to join a terror cult who burned people alive in cages, who stoned women and children. They committed, as the UN said, a genocide against Yazidi men, women and children. Thousands of people dead. Some of the most horrible and gruesome things, yet she decided, off her own back, to go and join that cult. And at 15, I don't know about you, but I was bunking off school to play video games, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it's not a gap year, is it?
No.
I mean, there's a certain irony to the trafficking claims, because, of course, ISIS were hugely involved in sexual slavery, particularly of Yazidi women, and had sex slave markets. There are also accusations against her that, of course, her legal team would dispute that she was involved in the Al-Kanza Brigade, which was an all-female ISIS brigade that were involved in essentially forcing morality codes on people, things like the clothes that you wear. And, she has at no point really shown, as Judita was saying, she hasn't really shown proper remorse for that. And I think if she were to come back to the UK, you say, how much money would we spend on keeping her in prison? But the reality is that I don't think that she would see justice if she was allowed back to the UK, because particularly in the case of women, but for ISIS fighters in general, it's very difficult to collect sufficient evidence of what's happened in a war zone in order to prosecute them. So it's unlikely she would see justice here. Instead, we would probably... It would be likely that maybe she would have a small prison sentence, but you can't sort of retroactively...
She'd need a new identity, and surely, and all the costs that come with that.
And
There's
also
no way she could walk the streets of Britain.
And she would need to be permanently watched as well, because she would become a flashpoint. And so there would be all of these other considerations that would probably be at huge cost to the taxpayer.
Yeah.
So either way, we're paying a fortune for her.
OK. Thank you both for now. Talk to you again very shortly. Up next, we'll be talking about the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Now, she's written quite an incendiary article for The Telegraph, claiming that Islamists are bullying Britain into submission. Is she right? GB Views at gbnews.com. You are with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, Alex Burkill here again with your latest GB News weather forecast. Today is going to be a blustery and showery day for many of us, some of the showers turning pretty heavy. There is some frost around first thing across northern parts in particular, but otherwise, like I said, plenty of showers, and some of these showers will turn heavy, possibly even thundery with some hail and even some sleet or snow over the higher ground of Scotland. Sunny spells in between the showers, the best of these towards eastern parts where you have the greatest chance of staying dry, and temperatures around average for the time of year. Highs close to 10 or 11 Celsius in the south, but worth noting that's lower than it was earlier on in the week. As we go through this evening and overnight, still some showers, particularly towards western and southern parts. Inland areas likely to be mostly dry, and here we will see some clear skies developing, under which temperatures will take a bit of a dip. So we could see some patchy frost, particularly in rural spots first thing tomorrow morning, and also some icy stretches and some mist and fog patches too. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, yes, still some showers, particularly for western and southern coastal areas, but for many it is looking largely dry. There'll be some decent sunny spells for a time, but perhaps some fair weather cloud bubbling up as we go through the afternoon. Temperatures will be similar to today, so just about getting into high single figures or perhaps scraping into double digits. Potentially some very wet and windy weather affecting southern parts as we go through Sunday, a drier story further north, and temperatures still about average.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Still to come, more reaction to that pivotal Shamima Begum decision at the Court of Appeal. She, of course, has lost her decision, her bid to come back to the UK. And actually, the email inbox, I've never seen a story like it. Have you, Pip? The emails are flying in from you, so we're going to get stuck into a couple of those.
I keep doing this. You keep seeing me doing this because I'm trying to look at all your messages.
And actually,
but it's impossible. So we are going to be reading some of them out, but do keep them coming in. GB Views at gbnews.com.
Can you imagine the reaction if she'd won the decision? More of this.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
It is 11 a.m. on Friday, the 23rd of February. Good morning. This is Britain's Newsroom with Ben Leo and Pip Thompson.
ISIS bride loses her appeal. Shamima Begum loses her latest bid to overturn a decision by the government to strip her of British citizenship. She remains in Syria in a refugee camp with no chance of return to the UK.
Stopping the boats. Home Secretary James Cleverly has signed a new deal with the EU's border agency to tackle migrant dinghies crossing the Channel.
Islamists in charge of Britain. That's the message this morning from former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who claims Islamists are bullying Britain into submission.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, in that spirit, today I can announce a new package of 200 Brimstone anti-tank missiles in a further boost to defend Ukraine.
As we approach the two-year anniversary of Russia invading Ukraine, the Defence Secretary pledges more military support. This is in addition to the $12 billion given to Ukraine since February 2022.
There's only one story, isn't there, Pip, which is getting the inbox absolutely wild. Shamima Begum, she's lost her appeal to come back to the UK after we stripped her of her citizenship for running off to become an ISIS bride. Now, though, it's not the end of the story, is it?
It could go on for many more years. She has got the chance to go to the Supreme Court, and after that she could go to the European Court of Human Rights. So it's not over yet. There are options. Give us your thoughts this morning, gbviews@gbnews.com. Let's get a roundup of all your headlines now with Tatiana.
Pip, thank you. 2 minutes past 11. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. ISIS bride Shamima Begum has lost an appeal over the removal of her British citizenship. The now 24-year-old was a teenager when she left the UK to travel to Syria and joined the so-called Islamic State. Her citizenship was later revoked on national security grounds. Last year, she lost a challenge at the Special Immigration Appeals Commission, and now 3 judges have upheld that ruling. However, human rights lawyer David Haig says Begum could still take further action.
Actually, what happened with the Court of Appeal, they've upheld the decisions of the Special Immigrations Appeal Court earlier. And this is, a long journey that Ms. Begum's been on. And it's certainly, though, not the end of the court battles. And it certainly was a resounding rejection. But now we look towards the Supreme Court, and I'm sure her legal teams will be doing that. So it's not the end.
Britain has signed a new deal with the EU's border agency in a further bid to stop small boats crossing the Channel. The deal, agreed with Frontex, will see the UK border force cooperate more closely with its European counterparts on intelligence and training. The Home Secretary has welcomed the European Home Affairs Commissioner to oversee the signing of the landmark agreement. So far this year, 1,716 people have made the crossing. James Cleverly says the deal will help tackle the issue.
It means we can share information quicker, share intelligence quicker, we can operate more effectively. And the reason that's important is because the EU wants to secure its external borders just as we do. So people who are coming into Europe from Eastern Europe, across the Mediterranean, the European Union want to stop them. We want to help them stop them, because those people filter through Europe and ultimately find themselves on small boats coming across to the UK.
Households will see their energy bills drop to the lowest level in 2 years. Energy regulator Ofgem has announced it's dropping the price cap by 12.3% in response to wholesale prices effective from April. It means a typical energy bill will fall by £238 to £1,690. Energy Secretary Claire Coutinho says the announcement is good news for families.
£250 almost coming off people's energy bills is going to be really welcome news for families up and down the country. We still have things like the cost of living payments in place, £900 for people who are really struggling, because we know there are some people who are still having a difficult time. But overall, this is good news for people in the country today.
Child serial killer Lucy Letby's bid to appeal her convictions will be heard in court in April. She was sentenced to 14 whole life orders after she killed 7 babies and attempted to murder 6 others at a hospital where she worked between June 2015 and 2016. If judges decline to give permission, it'll be the end of the appeals process for Letby. The hearing will be provisionally held on the 25th of April. The biggest ever drug bust has been made by UK authorities in a major blow to drugs cartels. 5.7 tonnes of cocaine, valued at more than £450 million, was found in a container at Southampton Port, which was transporting bananas into Europe from South America. The National Crime Agency officers believe the haul was heading to Hamburg, but believe a significant proportion of the drug would have ended back on UK streets. Nurses are demanding money to stop them leaving the health service. The Royal College of Nursing is urging the government to make payments worth several £1,000s on top of their salaries to tackle the current workforce crisis. It says a payment in addition to an above-inflation pay rise would also help attract more nurses into the service to help with understaffing. This comes, of course, as junior doctors in England are set to walk out from 7 o'clock tomorrow morning for 5 days. At least 4 people have died after a fire engulfed 2 residential buildings in eastern Spain last night. The blaze engulfed a 14-storey block in a neighbourhood in Valencia. Thick black smoke poured from the buildings. Firefighters were seen rescuing people from balconies. Many are still believed to be missing. It's still unclear how the blaze started. And history has been made as the first ever commercial US lunar lander has successfully touched down on the moon. There was applause and cheers in the Houston control room as landing success was confirmed. The craft, nicknamed Odysseus, is about the average size of a red London phone box and has travelled more than 620,000 miles from Florida. It's the first US lander to successfully reach the moon in more than 50 years, since the last of NASA's Apollo programme in 1972. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Ben and Pip.
Good morning. Welcome to Britain's Newsroom. It is coming up to 11:08. This is Ben Leo and Pip Thompson.
Shall we read some emails? You've gone absolutely crazy about this Shamima Begum decision. And actually, I wonder what the reaction would have been if she was allowed to come back. I dread to think. Beth says, further court appeals should not be paid for by British legal aid. I think the appeal itself should not be granted legal aid, as the original court decision, in my opinion, was final and correct. But she needs to go through the legal process, of course, it would be argued.
Yeah, Amanda says it is time the government amended legal aid funding laws on national security cases.
And Shirley says, if she's not a British citizen anymore, why are we paying her legal aid? Great question, actually. She's going to be getting around, I think the total it's been reported is some £5 million if and when she goes to the Supreme Court to appeal today's decision, which no doubt she'll do.
Yeah, and actually most of your views are about this legal aid issue, people not understanding why it's capped, and we keep paying for it, especially as she's had her British citizenship revoked. Well, let's dig into this a little bit more with Michael Walker from Navarro Media. Good to see you again, Michael. What's your reaction to this ruling?
Well, I suppose the issue with this, the moral issue, I don't think anyone has much sympathy for Shamima Begum, is she our problem? Is she a problem of our creation, and therefore is it fair for us to dump her on, essentially a much poorer country, Syria, to deal with? The judges have decided that regardless of the moral question, it was legal, the decision that was made by the Home Secretary. In terms of this legal aid issue, which sort of, I know lots of your audience seem somewhat exercised about, I can understand why people are annoyed about paying money towards someone like Shamima Begum, who, as I say, inspires no sympathy from, I think, most normal people in the country. But I do think it is important that we don't let extreme cases like this allow us to sort of abandon all of our principles of due process, because I think that would be somewhat throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
But our viewer made a really good point then, and actually I want to know the answer to it. She's not technically a British citizen anymore, so why is she still getting legal aid?
Well, because she's precisely appealing the decision to revoke her of citizenship. So if what you care about is due process, then the idea that the state can revoke your citizenship and therefore you immediately lose all legal rights as a British citizenship, that would sort of be against the principles of being able to appeal a decision.
So would you have her back then on the streets of London?
Well, I wouldn't want her back on the streets of London. I suppose the issue is... in prison? I mean, I think ideally,
I mean, do you subscribe to the notion that you can keep a closer eye on people like that by keeping them closer to you?
Well, I think for the safety of British people, it's probably more helpful for her to be in Syria than here with a close eye kept on her. But at the same time, you've also got to think about Syria as a country. We've sort of exported that problem, as it were. She was born in Britain. So, yes, it's a difficult situation for anyone who has to deal with the Shamima Begum problem, right? But I don't necessarily think it's legitimate for us to sort of outsource that problem to someone else.
And do you agree with the concept that most of the country will be breathing a sigh of relief at this decision today, not least because of what we've seen in Parliament, the chaos with that vote and the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, but also this quite damning column in the Daily Telegraph today from Suella Braverman, who says, "This is no longer the great country I knew. Islamists are bullying us into submission." Could you imagine the tension if that decision today at the Court of Appeal allowed her, Shamima Begum, to come back to the UK?
Well, I suppose what I would say to that is if a decision such as that, and, I'm not a legal expert, I don't really have an opinion on the decision made by the judges, but I think if for us to have let back someone who has committed terrible crimes and then go to prison, for that to sort of create some huge social division and social tension, I think would show sort of the weakness of our society. Well, I think we should be accepting that sort of we're strong enough to deal with one person returning from a war.
If it was an isolated incident, I could probably agree with you, but I'm just saying in the context of what's going on at the moment.
Well, the context of what's going on at the moment, so the context of the Suella Braverman article, I think everyone's been taken for an absolute ride.
Why?
So, well, essentially what you had on Wednesday, Lindsay Hoyle comes into Parliament and says, I'm going to allow both amendments, and he says that's because the rules are archaic. All the Labour MPs cheer, they're very happy, this is a great moment. Right? Then there is a backlash from MPs who thinks that parliamentary process have been subverted. And then suddenly he comes out, what excuse can I use? Oh, threats. And now we're all having this debate about Islamists controlling the country.
Or do you
why would he not have said on Wednesday that was the issue? Why did he wait until the following day? He said, the reason I'm overturning parliamentary precedent, or whatever it is because I want more voices to be heard. It seems to me a post facto excuse which was used, which has now allowed people like Suella Braverman, and quite a lot of hosts on this channel, I have to say, to sort of use this as this massive excuse to stoke a lot of fear about essentially lots of people who are protesting against a genocidal war, right, in my opinion.
Either way, whether the reality is that, yes, Starmer and Labour put pressure on Lindsay Hoyle to behave as he did, or it's actually the truth that Hoyle behaved in that way because he was protecting MPs, he was fearful of threats to their safety, either way, the end result for democracy isn't good, is it?
Yeah, but sure, I think that was a terrible decision, but what we're talking about now is a former Home Secretary who wants to be the next leader of the Conservative Party,
But Suella's not jumped on this. She's been banging this drum for months and months and months, and it's why she was sacked.
Sure, and I think it's a very bad drum to be banging, right? I have a problem with Islamist extremism. I also have a problem with far-right extremism. Right, and
90% of suspects on the terror watch list in this country are Islamist extremists.
So 2 MPs have been killed in the past decade, one by a far-right extremist, one by an Islamist extremist. Now, as you've sort of recognised there, I think one problem with Islamist extremism is it has led to more acts of terrorism. My problem with far-right extremism is it has way more access to power. And I have to say, GBNews, I think, is an example of this. So there was an exclusive yesterday, actually from Hope Not Hate, sort of showing what tweets your owner had liked and retweeted. I think it probably is worth reading them out.
Half those tweets, the majority of normal-thinking people in this country agree with.
Let's test it. Let's see what
by the way, can I say something? Hope Not Hate as well. They call themselves an anti-extremist organisation. They are some of the most extreme far-left agitators and campaigners.
Let's read the tweets. Let's read the tweets. So these are the ones that your co-owner liked. It is just a matter of time before civil war starts in Europe. The native European population is losing patience with fake refugee invaders. Now, I'm against violent extremism. Warning about a civil war. 7.5% of the British public are Muslims. You know, the vast, vast majority of them, taxpayers, decent people. And he's talking, or he's liking a tweet about a civil war.
Well, yeah, we've
got another one here.
Talking, he liked to tweet. These are not tweets that he has written.
Pattern. I'll just read one more. OK. If we want European civilization to survive, we need to not just close the borders, but start mass expulsions immediately. We don't stand a chance unless we start that process very soon.
Do you know what that tweet... Michael, do you know what that tweet was in response to? By the way, Sir Paul Marshall didn't write that. He just retweeted someone else.
Well, this one he retweeted.
And do you know what that tweet was in response to? Do you know?
It was in response to a video of some people in Africa.
It was Ross Kemp interviewing people in Calais who didn't understand the concept of rape. He was trying to ask them, what happens if you rape a woman?
And do you think that's an argument for mass expulsions of people who are already in this country?
Of rapists, yes.
There aren't enough rapists to have mass expulsions of rapists.
That
he is talking about people's ethnic backgrounds.
From a figure on the centre-right was referring to Islamic rapists.
One more tweet. So this is one he did retweet. Pascal's wager in the 21st century. God may or may not be real, but the other side is so passionate, so committed to worshipping Satan, evil, homosexuality and corrupting children that even if God wasn't real, believing in him to fend these demons off is preferable. Now, as a homosexual, I find that somewhat offensive. Well, so I think if we are talking about extremism in this country, yes, there are some extremist radical Muslims,
are not here
Islamists,
to actually defend
but there is
themselves.
Also a channel which is funded by someone who clearly has very extremist beliefs.
Are not actually here to defend themselves. There is a statement which we will bring people. Hope Not Hate.
I'll read that statement now. So Sir Paul Marshall. He said in January 2024. Sorry, no, there we go. That's. 1 second.
It's a very divisive ideology, which, I mean, he seems to be endorsing here, and which is so often propounded from this TV station, right?
He seems to be endorsing it. He did not write those tweets themselves. He does have a reply to all this as well.
So his reply is to say that it's, there's lots of stuff on Twitter. It's a small proportion of what he's been tweeting. Hope Not Hate actually said it's not that small a proportion of what he's been tweeting. And I think it's also, I mean, you've got to look here. If this was isolated, if this was
Is he not entitled to an opinion, though? This is what we exist for, to have a broad range of opinion and to not shut people down.
Yeah, well, I mean, so we are having a conversation here about extremism, right? And I think one... always implicit in a conversation about extremism is there is some sort of limit. So you're talking about people who are talking about radical violent Islamism. They should go on the PREVENT programme, right? I also think that people who think there's going to be some civil war between a small ethnic minority and, I mean, here it's talking about the native population. That, to me, is violent extremism or something that I'll
come back to that. Let me just read Sir Paul's statement. He said, Paul Marshall's account is private, but is nonetheless followed by 5,000 people, including many journalists. He posts on a wide variety of subjects, and those cited represent a small and unrepresentative sample of over 5,000 posts. This sample does not represent Sir Paul Marshall's views. As most X/Twitter users know, it can be a fountain of ideas, but some of it is uncertain quality, and all his posts have now been deleted to avoid any further misunderstanding.
I suppose the issue of representativeness as well. So there are, 7.5% of Britain are Muslims. There is a very, very small minority of those who are violent Islamists. And then how much time is spent in papers such as The Telegraph, which, by the way, he wants to buy, on channels such as GB News, talking about this apparent threat of violent Islamist extremism?
There's plenty of time spent on other papers telling the opposite side of this.
Oh, no one's defending Islamist extremism, are they?
So somebody else will write the opposite in The Guardian.
Oh, well, I don't think anyone is in The Guardian saying violent radical Islamism is the best thing. Right, the opposite to what Suella Braverman is saying?
Yes.
Well, the opposite being that we're not heading towards some kind of civil war. They're entitled to their opinion.
You don't have to agree with it. We can discuss it.
They're entitled to their opinion, but I think what we're talking about here is extreme views in society, which are somewhat undermining social cohesion.
Are you saying there's not a problem in this country?
Well, I think there is. I think there are some radical Islamists in this country.
7-7, Lee
and that
Rigby,
is a
Sir David
problem.
Amos, Mike Freer.
I think the idea that
Arena bombing.
I think the idea. So
London
I think the
Bridge
idea.
2017,
Right.
London Bridge 2019, Westminster 2017, Westminster 2020, the Reading attack, Batley Grammar, weekly Hamas sympathetic marches through London, from the river to the sea on Big Ben.
So there are two issues.
People are concerned
There are
about
two
the way
issues
this
which need to
country
be
is heading.
separated. There's two issues that need to be separated. So ISIS-style radical terrorism, right? Obviously, absolutely appalling. We need to make sure that the police are clamping down properly on that. The other issue is that there are a lot of Muslims in this country, lots of them very angry about a war going on in Gaza, which I think is perfectly legitimate, who are being smeared as on the same spectrum as the kind of people who carried out the 7-7 bombing. Now, I don't try and say that everyone who voted Brexit, everyone who wants to stop immigration is, of the same type of person as the person who killed Joe Cox, right? So I think we have to be very careful about generalisation. Obviously, violent extremism, a massive problem, but trying to lump a whole ethnic minority in with a tiny, tiny minority of violent extremists, I think is very, very dangerous.
OK, Michael, we're going to have to leave it there and breathe.
Nice debate, lively. Still to come, it's the eve of the second anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and we'll be joined by a Ukrainian MP, actually, to tell us why we should keep funding their war effort. That comes off the back, of course, of new finances. Is it 12 billion that Grant Shapps has pledged today?
Yes, we are talking about that next. It's a 2-year anniversary tomorrow. You're with Britain's Newsroom on a very lively GB News.
Earlier on GB News Radio.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Chris, what is the preferred way in which the police go about their business at the moment? There's these two strands of thinking: evidence-based policing versus bobbies on the beat.
It's very, very difficult. The problem that police have got, basically, is that they're too thinly spread, and it's too much is expected of them. There's a long list, isn't it? Every month we hear police need to do more about this, police need to do more about that, and police do their best. They're overwhelmed with bureaucracy. I mean, when I was a young PC, if I took a shoplifter in, then I'd be in and out within an hour. You take a shoplifter in now, and you're doomed for the rest of your shift for 6 or 7 hours dealing with the bureaucracy. Police want to get back in those communities because community policing is really the core of policing. But such are the demands on their time at the moment, and the bureaucracy, and the fact that they are struggling now to retain experienced officers. People are hemorrhaging out of the police, and new recruits coming in haven't got that experience, and there's a good chance they may not stay anyway. So there's all sorts of problems. And for the Home Secretary to glibly say he wants more done, frankly, clearly shows he's got no understanding of the pressure police are under, and of course the constant criticism that they face across the board. Very rarely do you actually hear of police officers getting praised for acts of bravery or acts of compassion. So there's a problem with morale in the police force, and it's clearly a problem with the Home Secretary, who needs to get out there and talk to officers on the front line who frankly are struggling. And last night, of course, was a graphic example.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It is 11:23 and you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Pip Thompson and Ben Leo.
We're joined by writer and broadcaster Emma Webb and broadcast journalist Judita De Silva in the studio with us now. Shall we talk about Suella Braverman's quite damning Telegraph in the article, Emma? She says, "This is no longer the great country I knew. Islamists are bullying us into submission." Has she got a point, or is she, as Michael Walker just said, jumping on the chance to stoke the flames?
I mean, she might be doing this for political reasons. She might be positioning herself in a particular way politically, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't also believe what she's saying, and nor does it not mean that she's correct. I think what we saw in Parliament with, quote, Hoylegate, as it's now being referred to, plus the fact that we saw a genocidal chant being projected onto our Parliament and also one of our most iconic landmarks, I think she's right. The fact that Parliament behaved as it did and changed procedures out of fear of threats from Islamists. The fact that, as she's pointed out in this article, that Mike Freer had to resign from his position because of death threats and because his parliamentary office was burned down. And actually, even the fact that we've just seen, so in response to this, we saw the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, disagreeing with her and saying that we live by the rule of law. I think he must think that the British public just simply don't have eyes. When you see that actually only just now there's been a video released online of Simon Danchuk, who's the Rochdale Reform candidate, being prevented from entering the hustings there. So we have a serious problem with democracy in this country.
There is an opposing view from people that she has written that article, and it does use incendiary language.
It's very strong.
And she is being accused of attacking Muslims and immigrants in order to win votes. And also, this article comes 24 hours after statistics showed that there's been a huge increase in anti-Muslim hate. And some people will question and say, well, her writing that isn't going to help the situation. We know there's a massive rise on both sides.
There is nothing Islamophobic about pointing out what she has pointed out. There is nothing Islamophobic about pointing out that the fact that there are extreme Islamists in this country that have threatened parliamentary candidates, and that's the reason why Sir Lindsay Hoyle made the decision that he made. So it's completely besides the point. The fact that if we're talking about hatred, the fact that the Metropolitan Police did not arrest the people who were projecting the genocidal slogan from the River to the Sea, Palestine will be free, onto our Parliament building. That's what we should be talking about. This is not Islamophobic.
Do you agree with that review? I think it's Lord Wolney, isn't it, where he's saying that protests should not happen outside public buildings?
No, anymore. I don't.
You think they should? It's that dividing line.
I'm not in favour of cracking down on protests. I think in this instance, there are rules about how you can protest outside of Parliament. There are certain areas that you're not allowed to protest on, and those rules have on occasion been sort of ignored by the police. You've seen that there have been people protesting in the areas where they're not supposed to be. There are rules to ensure that MPs can go in and out of Parliament freely, so that protesters can't prevent them from doing that, can't essentially besiege Parliament. So I don't think we should be cracking down on protest, but I do think we need to recognise that we have a serious problem. We've seen it with the Batley grammar teacher who had to go into hiding. We've seen it with MPs being threatened in education and in politics. We are seeing people being threatened by Islamist extremists, and it is unacceptable in a free society. It's unacceptable in a democracy. It's a challenge to democracy. It's putting our constitution in jeopardy, and we shouldn't tolerate it.
Judita, where are you on this?
First of all, whenever you get a message, always question the messenger. And I think that fundamentally it's political posturing, because you find a group that creates a lot of tension and you sound the dog whistle and galvanise a base. That's what Suella Braverman is doing. But in the actual messaging, there are certain points she brings up that are valid, 100%. But if you're going to start talking to Islamophobia, talk to everything that's an issue. Talk to anti-Semitism, anti-LGBTQIA plus rhetoric, racism, misogyny. Talk to all of it. And the way it is addressed, the way it is executed, and the institutions it threatens by the way it is executed. Because at the end of the day, we exist in a time, which is where I do agree with her, where your ability to question what you do not understand, challenge what you do not like, and pursue recourse is being stripped away from people, so that everyone is kind of homogenized into towing a single line.
I think it's John Mann, who's the independent advisor to the UK government on anti-Semitism. He claims that when she was Home Secretary, she ignored advice on how to tackle anti-Semitism. And he says that her inaction in office is part of the problem.
That's why I say always question the messenger, because when you kind of turn the microscope onto one angle of something that is a 360-degree problem, you're showing that all you're trying to do is galvanize a particular base for your own benefit. If she had spoken holistically, for the first time for me personally, I might actually have said, OK, Suella Braverman is actually acting in a position that improves society as a whole, as opposed to just the people she wishes to appeal to.
OK. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss, she was in America last night at a Conservative conference. She was mixing with the likes of Donald Trump and Steve Bannon. Take a look at what she said.
This is what every human being wants. Margaret Thatcher says when people are free to choose, they choose freedom. And it's so true. People want control of their own lives. They don't want the government telling them what to do. They don't want these woke policies inflicted on them. But the problem is the leftist activists have been very, very assiduous at pushing that agenda, which is why we need a Conservative movement that challenges that at a grassroots level.
She really, Emma, sort of nailed down the image of a Conservative firebrand last night. As I said, mixing with Donald Trump. Nigel Farage was there. What did you make of her appearance at CPAC, which is a big Conservative conference?
She's been using a lot of those sort of buzzwords like wokenomics.
Deep state.
She's trying to sell a book. Clear about that, but she's really trying to appeal to the Republican audience, to try and draw parallels between what she has attempted to do in the Conservative Party and what there are some Republicans attempting to do in the States, and presenting herself as having been the victim of this enormous backlash because she was trying to put forward real, true Conservative values. Now, I think that there is something to be debated about how much of a true philosophical Conservative she is. She's certainly a Thatcherite Conservative.
She used to be a Lib Dem, didn't she?
And so, she's, I think she's fairly liberal on the social side of things, and she's very, obviously, extremely free market.
Well, can I read you what she said in her speech? She took aim at British institutions and did say the term deep state, which we'd call sort of quangos over here. But she said Conservatives are now operating in what is a hostile environment, and we essentially need a bigger bazooka in order to be able to deliver. We've got to challenge the institutions themselves. We've got to challenge the system itself, and we've got to be prepared to take that on as Conservatives.
I'm glad you put bigger bazooka into context, because
Republicans would love
that. Would be interesting then.
It's one of those situations that when you look at in the fullness of time and you look at the totality of how people assess leaders, Liz Truss looks at someone who's pretty much incompetent based on her time in the Premiership. So what she has to now do is damage control of that image if she wants to be a viable politician going forward. And post-Trump, we live in a world where there's no ability to kind of be pragmatic, be objective. You've got to pick a side and really run down that side. And that's what we're seeing with her, where she's kind of having a political rebrand where I'm willing to say it to the extreme and stand in it. And that's why we could actually be talking about her in this way on the show today.
I just wonder if Liz Truss ultimately will be proven right in terms of going for growth. I mean, it certainly looks that way. But we'll move on. Lib Dem MP Christine Jardine will join us to talk about the pressure of the Speaker in the House of Commons. Also, I'd like to ask where Sir Ed Davey's been. He popped up after a couple of weeks AWOL yesterday to speak to our man Christopher Hope. But all that and much more after your morning news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Ben, thank you very much. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. ISIS bride Shamima Begum has lost an appeal over the removal of her British citizenship. The now 24-year-old was a teenager when she left the UK to travel to Syria and joined the so-called Islamic State. Her citizenship was later revoked on national security grounds. Begum's solicitor has now vowed to continue fighting until she gets justice and is safely back home. Britain has signed a new deal with the EU's border agency in a further bid to stop small boat crossings. The agreement with Frontex will see UK Border Force cooperate more closely with its European counterparts on intelligence and training. 1,716 people have been intercepted crossing the Channel so far this year. Serial child killer Lucy Letby's bid to appeal her convictions will be heard by a court in April. The former nurse was sentenced to 14 whole life orders after she murdered 7 babies and attempted to kill 6 others at a hospital between June 2015 and 2016. If judges rule against her, it'll be the end of Letby's appeal process. Households will see their energy bills drop to the lowest level in 2 years. Energy regulator Ofgem has announced it's dropping the price cap by 12.3% in response to wholesale prices effective from April. It means a typical energy bill will fall by £238 to £1,690. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2672 and €1.1707 euros. The price of gold is £1,595 and 70 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,680 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
OK, we're joined now by Tom and Emily, hosts of Good Afternoon Britain, which is coming up in, 25 minutes? What's in store, guys?
Well, after the judge in this Shamima Begum case said that she is the author of her own misfortune, we'll be asking the question, is she?
Yes, and we'll also be discussing the legal aid issue. Hundreds of thousands of taxpayer money have gone towards her various
$5 million
appeals.
it's going to be if it hits the Supreme Court.
Her lawyers insist they'll take it as far as this can go. So
that could be many years.
Should we be backing this? We're going to have a fiery debate on this. We've got 2 very different views.
And it's been 5 years since the original decision from Sajid Javid when he was Home Secretary, back in 2019. That's when this saga began in terms of all of these appeals and the multiple appearances in court. It's dragged on for so long, and yet we're hearing more appeals could still come. It's a veritable mess.
What's quite interesting is that human rights groups that have been cited, they're saying that she's a victim of bullying, that ministers are bullying her and that she's a victim in all of this. So there's a question for you. Is Shamima a victim?
I mean, people think she's a child. Was a child when she left. She's experienced trauma.
Yeah, it must be very traumatic to sew bombs into vests.
I'm sorry, I said earlier, what were you guys doing at 15?
Not a lot.
What was the naughtiest thing you did at 15?
I was doing my homework.
I wasn't doing my homework. That's probably the naughtiest.
I used to bunk off school and play video games, and that's probably, the limit of my disobedience.
I once bunked off school for a very short bit of time at the end of the day to get down to London to go to an economic affairs conference.
It would be something like that. He's such a nerd.
So predictable.
Such a nerd. So we're going to be discussing that. We're also going to be reflecting on 2 years since the invasion of Ukraine. Of course, we're going to be speaking to a Ukrainian voice on that one. The big question over how much money has been spent on this conflict. Is there the will in the West to continue?
It's £12 billion of UK taxpayers' money over 2 years, which is a vast amount of money, but it is about 3% of the NHS budget each year, which does put into context the amount of public spending that there is. So £6 billion a year, it's a huge amount of money. It could fund many, many things. But in the context of wider public spending, there are some very interesting parallels that can be drawn.
And Zelensky certainly still wants Trump to come over and meet him because of course, Donald Trump did say, I could end this war in 24 hours. Zelensky says, absolutely, you could not come and meet me.
OK.
So we'll be digging into that.
Thank you so much. See you in precisely 23 minutes.
Excellent.
For now, though, you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Talk to you shortly.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
GB News Breakfast. every day from 6 a.m.
Look, you're a respected royal biographer, and there are so many people who are on the sort of royal gravy train, if you will, people who are making a career out of gossip and speculation, but yours very much built on confidence and sources and fact. And you don't offer an opinion that often inside your book, but when you do, I suppose, therefore, it carries a bit more weight. So when you say that the Sussexes are easily offended and, you know, effectively pretty prickly, what do you mean and what have you based that on?
Well, on numerous... their riposte to any given situation in their books, in their TV interviews. And let's not forget, there have been a lot of TV interviews, 6-part Netflix drama, Spare. You see time and again that they feel that they feel resentful. They feel that, you know, something hasn't gone their way and that this is part of some sort of calculated campaign against them. And actually, I mean, when you've got a fast-moving story, I mean, for example, in my book, I go into those frantic hours after the death of the Queen, and everybody's trying to sort themselves out. And Harry writes in his book Spare how you know, no one will return his calls, and he can't get through to anyone, and it's sort of it's just all a bit me. And actually, the whole kind of royal machine, if you like, is a team effort. And I just think it's very sad because, you know, Harry and Meghan, they had such potential. And now when we do tend to hear from them, on a royal matter, it's just to say how miserable they were being royal. And that was, you know, they were royal for whatever it was, 600-700 days. They're post-royal now for over
Can you envisage a scenario where they're back in England and they're back in royal life?
I can't envisage a situation where they're back, as it were, as part of the sort of royal working unit, but I could certainly see it becoming a kind of normal thing for them to keep.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11:40. You're with Ben and Pip on Britain's Newsroom, only on GB News. Got some emails, Pip, I think?
Yeah, we've been talking as well about Ukraine aid. It's 2 years, can you believe, since Russia invaded Ukraine, and the UK has been giving billions of pounds over the last 2 years. Jacqueline, good morning. Instead of aiding foreign countries, you think, maybe we should spend that money on strengthening our own military and having a strong army.
And Ron says, I believe with a heavy heart, funding the Ukraine must be reduced drastically or stopped. We have too many problems here to deal with. Of course, the Americans at the moment, primarily the Republicans, they're umming and ahhing about another $60 billion care package. This morning, we've approved another £12 billion worth. And actually, I've sometimes made the point, you know, where does it end, the bottomless pit of taxpayer money? But what we've seen now in Ukraine is because they've not been getting that funding, the weapons, the ammunition, they're now losing key ground, including quite a vital town in the Donbass. So,
and, you know, we have to maybe remember who they're fighting, which is Vladimir Putin, who yesterday was pictured flying in a supersonic strategic bomber.
Oh, really?
It's clearly a reminder of his nuclear capabilities. So,
well, we've got a Ukrainian MP coming up very shortly, I believe, so we'll have all that and more with them.
Now, the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has claimed that Islamists are now in charge of Britain after the Commons Speaker admitted that he'd been wrong to ignore protocol over security threats to MPs.
Yes, her comments come a day after Sir Lindsay Hoyle sparked a furious backlash over a Gaza ceasefire vote by allowing a vote on a Labour amendment. The Commons Speaker is now under intense pressure to quit, with almost 70 MPs calling for him to go. Joining us now is Lib Dem MP for Edinburgh West, Christine Jardine. Good morning, Christine. Thanks for joining us. First of all, do you think Sir Lindsay should go?
No, of course I don't. And I don't think he's under intense pressure. 70 MPs having signed is not intense pressure. It's pressure, but I think that Sir Lindsay has apologised to the House. He said he's made a mistake, and he is someone who has gone a long way to repairing the reputation of the office of Speaker since he became Speaker following John Bercow. What happened on Wednesday night did not reflect well on Parliament. But I think we should remember that a lot of people acted irresponsibly, I believe, by putting party politics first, inflaming an already dangerous situation, and that we all need to get a grip, build a consensus, and move forward.
I mean, it was an absolute debacle. Do you feel embarrassed by it, Christine? Because all the while you're there in Parliament and thousands of more people are getting killed during this Israel-Gaza war. It was something so utterly serious that you were voting on.
It was. And one of the things that I find almost unforgivable about this is that there was a petty party political positioning going on, initially by the SNP, who very carefully worded an amendment so that it would, they thought, show the divisions in the Labour Party. Both ourselves and I understand the Labour Party were trying to be consensual in this and wanted to speak to the SNP about it. And in a situation where we had the opportunity to build a consensus, to send a message to the Israeli government and to Hamas that we don't like what is happening, that there needs to be peace, that we need a two-state solution, we want them to find a way forward, we indulged in petty political wrangling in the House of Commons, which descended into debacle. And then to blame Sir Lindsay Hoyle, who has said he made a mistake, and I accept that apology, but whose motivation in doing it was to try to avoid the sort of debacle that we saw, and putting MPs, their families and their staff at further risk from the sort of intimidation and threatening behaviour that we've seen already.
Well, how safe do you feel, Christine, as an MP, or do you have to take extra steps to protect yourself? And what might those steps be?
Well, I have to tell you that at Westminster on Wednesday, I don't think anybody felt particularly safe. We all felt that a lot of the behaviour that is happening is quite threatening. I have been fortunate in that I have not been subjected to anything like my constituents are very supportive of it, I feel. But I have not been subjected to anything like Tobias Elwood and his family, with the protests at their house. Or I know colleagues in Scotland as well who've had protests at their offices, and their staff have been made to feel very threatened by that.
Do you agree? Sorry, Christine, to jump in. I just wanted your, just very quickly, one sentence. Do you agree that protests outside Parliament, public buildings, should be banned?
No, people have the right to protest, but they have to do it reasonably, and they have to not make other people feel threatened. That's the difference. Everybody has the right to disagree with Parliament. Everybody has the right to protest. Everybody has the right to the freedom of their thought. But they have to respect others' rights as well, and they have to protest in a way that is respectful. What we saw at Parliament went beyond that. And it's not acceptable to make anybody, not just MPs, anybody feel threatened for what they believe and what they think. And the Islamophobia and the rampant anti-Semitism we're seeing emerging in this country at the moment is completely unacceptable.
Christine, just in 15 seconds, literally, where's your leader, Sir Ed Davey, been hiding? He popped up yesterday after going AWOL following the post office crisis. 15 seconds, why has he been hiding?
He's not hiding anywhere.
He has been.
He's been working for his constituents like most MPs. He's not hiding anywhere.
All right.
Christine Jardine, Lib Dem MP for Edinburgh West, thanks ever so much for talking to us on Britain's Newsroom.
Still to come, with the cost of living worse than ever, should we keep funding Ukraine's war effort against Russia? We'll be debating that next. You're with Ben and Pip on Britain's Newsroom, only on GB News.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Can, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it. It will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. Now, on the eve of the second anniversary of the war in Ukraine, there are growing concerns about the country's ability to continue fighting effectively.
The country is desperately short of artillery shells and ammunition and has made little territorial gains over the past year.
The UK, though, has remained steadfast in its support, providing more than £7 billion in military aid over the past 2 years.
And a £200 million programme to provide thousands of extra military drones has also now been agreed. Britain has also trained 60,000 Ukrainian troops, provided 6 million rounds of small arms ammunition and 8,000 rounds of tank artillery.
We're joined by Ukrainian Member of Parliament, Andriy Osadchuk. Andriy, very good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us. Where are we at then with the war? 2 years almost. Should we, do you think, be supporting Ukraine? Should be supporting you until Russia quits? Or actually, would it be better for us to be encouraging negotiation?
If you wanted the West to be collapsed so you can stop supporting Ukraine, the formula is very simple. Good morning. I'm speaking to you from Ukrainian Parliament. Yes, tomorrow it will be a second anniversary of a big war in Europe. It's not only in Ukraine, it's the big war in Europe. And Ukrainian Parliament didn't stop its work even for 1 day, even in most difficult times in the beginning of March, April 2022. And for these 2 years, we simply confirmed several facts, which was not obvious for the Western people. First of all, Russia is not so scary as one may think. It's possible to fight Russia successfully. Secondly, the West always underestimate Ukraine. No one believed that we are able to fight successfully with Russia. And despite huge Russian military potential, they in fact can do nothing with Ukraine. They are fighting during months for small villages or small cities. And in fact, the front line is almost stand still for the last almost a year. The other important thing that we went so far in these confrontations between Russia and the West that it looks like everyone understood that the stakes are so high that it's not Ukraine which can win or lose this war.
Yeah.
We are talking about the future of safety and security of European Union, of Europe, and in fact of the free world.
Andre, sorry to interrupt. Do you feel like the West has betrayed Ukraine with the latest umming and ahhing on funding? Just very briefly, if you can, please.
To win the war, we need military equipment and we need weapons. It's very simple. Yes, the West was not really prepared for that amount of weapons which are needed daily on the front line for the war, which is equivalent for the First and Second World War. But yes, we need more and more equipment. If you don't want to participate in this fight, you'd better give these weapons to Ukrainians. Very simple.
OK. Andrei Odenchuk, thank you very much. Speaking from the Ukrainian Parliament, thank you for your time, sir, and good luck to you as well in your country.
That is just about it from Britain's newsroom. I think we all need to take a breath, don't we now? It's been very lively. But thank you so much for your company, your contributions, all those views that we had coming in. You're back this weekend, aren't you?
I'm on Saturday Morning Live with Ellie tomorrow, replacing Peter Andre. Sorry to disappoint, but that's your lot.
I'm off a little bit earlier. I'm bringing you breakfast. Well, not literally, but you know what I mean. Thanks ever so much. Have a great weekend. Up next, Good Afternoon Britain.
Just as handsome as Peter Andre,
I'm just looking forward to the singing. But coming up on the show today, we're going to be exploring just how much the United Kingdom taxpayer is on the hook for Shamima Begum's appeals. Is it going to cost us even more money to both fund her appeal to come back in the UK and stop her from coming back?
And Suella Braverman's controversial claim that Islamists, extremists and anti-Semites are running the country. We'll get stuck into that after the weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. Mix of sunshine and showers through the rest of the day, and it is feeling colder than of late. That's as we've got more typical air mass for the time of year now. After a very mild February, we've got this colder air across us. It's being brought by a westerly wind as well, and that will continue to drag in showers from the west. We've seen most of the frequent showers across the west so far today. However, through the rest of the day, the showers will spread into eastern areas. But there is a good chance of some sunshine across parts of northeastern Scotland and eastern areas of northern England as well. And in the sunshine, it won't feel too bad, 8 or 9 degrees, but that is a little lower than it has been recently. This evening, showers will continue to push into more eastern areas, but further west and north, it should turn a little bit drier. We'll see clear skies developing through the evening and overnight. That will allow a much colder night tonight more widely. So we'll likely see a bit of a frost tomorrow morning, also a risk of some ice, but also some mist and fog, mainly in inland areas. So it'll be a chilly and possibly murky start to the day, but many areas should stay dry, at least through the morning, with some decent sunshine through the day. However, there is a risk of showers again on Saturday, but this time the showers will be lighter and there'll be fewer. So many areas should stay dry through the day. And again, it'll feel fairly pleasant in the sunshine with temperatures around average. But there is more rain on the way for Sunday.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 p.m. on Friday, the 23rd of February.
ISIS bride remains defiant. Shamima Begum loses her appeal again, but says she will not stop fighting until she's back in Britain. That's despite her appeals costing the British taxpayer potentially millions.
Are Islamists running Britain? Suella Braverman says Islamists, extremists and anti-Semites are now in charge of the UK. However, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, rejects his predecessor's claim, saying that Britain is a high-functioning democracy. Who's right?
And £12 billion. That's how much taxpayers have sent to Ukraine in aid since Russia's invasion 2 years ago. That's enough to build 30 new hospitals in Britain. But with Putin more belligerent than ever, can the West afford not to fund Ukraine's campaign?
It's all about money today, isn't it? It's money to Ukraine, money for Shamima Begum, although I think those two are slightly different moral questions. But
no money to Suella Braverman.
No money to Suella. No, but it does seem that there is a lot of money floating around in these questions. And I suppose at a time when budgets seem pretty strapped all over the place, how do we have a system that is potentially funneling millions of pounds to Shamima Begum and her appeals?
Yeah, I mean, potentially millions going on this case, and she has the right to then appeal this again and potentially again after that. I mean, how much money can we possibly spend on a girl who chose to go off to Syria to take part in ISIS activity, to marry an ISIS agent, or whatever you want to call him, a terrorist, and then apparently, according to human rights advocates, she's a victim.
But why can't
she's being bullied?
She's one of the
victim.
most famous people in the country. If she wanted to fund this herself, she perfectly well could do.
Well, apparently she has no resources.
I don't believe that someone with name recognition as high as Shamima Begum could have no resources. She could do a tell-all interview to someone and get some pretty penny for that.
Well, yeah, she probably could, actually. She could start a GoFundMe.
Someone could ghostwrite a book. She could put that on, and do you know what? It would sell probably pretty well. She could do modelling. She could start.
Well, she did have a bit of a glow-up, didn't she?
She did. I mean, my goodness, so many ways that she could raise private capital to fund this. Why is she relying on the taxpayer?
I mean, her solicitor saying, we are not going to stop fighting until she does get justice, until she is safely back home. Sounds a bit of a threat there. Let us know what you make of this all. We're going to be having a bit of a fiery debate later in the show, so get your views in before we get to that. gbviews@gbnews.com, but it's your headlines.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. ISIS bride Shamima Begum has lost an appeal over the removal of her British citizenship. The now 24-year-old was a teenager when she left the UK to travel to Syria and joined the so-called Islamic State. Her citizenship was later revoked on national security grounds. Begum's solicitor has vowed to continue fighting until she gets justice and is safely back home. Human rights lawyer David Haig says other avenues can still be pursued.
Actually, what happened with the Court of Appeal, they've upheld the decisions of the Special Immigrations Appeal Court earlier. And this is, a long journey that Ms. Begum's been on.